las mujeres, las chicas se pasan a la parte de la maloco, que es el sitio de las familias para acostarse, para dormir y todo. Y en ese momento se puede oír la sonido de la hoja en el hoyo de cerámico. El señor que está preparando, tostando la coca. Y al mismo tiempo su hermano está preparando la hoja de yaruma. Y hay que quemarlo con un fuego inmenso que llega hasta el techo de la maloca. Y después se queda un montón de ceniza blanquita. Al mismo tiempo, con la hoja, cuando está bien tostada, se puede ponerlo en el pilón. Es un trabajo duro en que los señores pasan unos como 25 a 40 minutos y hay que echar la ceniza de yayuma y después hay un polvo que es muy, muy fino. Y hay que pasar el polvo en como una pedacito de tejido o cualquier cosa, algo, fibra de una palmera, cualquier cosa, pero el producto mismo, el mambe y badú, es bastante fino, como el pudor de talco. Mientras al mismo momento, cuando las mujeres ya están descansando, los hombres sienten en un círculo para hablar, para utilizar ambil, tabaco y pues coca o mambe. Y es posible que ellos van a discutir la día que viene, o quizás el viaje de los 4 ancestros, los Iowa, que subieron el río Amazonas en los botes, los canoes sagrados, con las plantas más importantes, la coca, yagé y tabaco. Y con ese mambe se puede andar en el monte con la alegre, no se puede sentir el calor. Y es una manera de vivir que es muy sano. Y es una parte fundamental de la comida de la gente y de la vida, de su trabajo y más bien de su vida espiritual. Y mi profesor Schultes, el etnobotánico famoso, fue muy orgulloso porque él tomó mambe cada día para 12 años en el Amazonas. Y él fue como un conocedor de mambe. Su favorito fue el mambe de los tanimucos, que tiene esencia de unas resinas, de unas plantas, ¿no? Y de vez en cuando, en las fiestas de la gente de bien en Bogotá, siempre él tuvo su lata de mambe, ¿no? Y para cualquier persona que quieran escuchar, él puede enseñar que hay 2 variedades de yoruma. El mejor es Cecropia sclerophylla y el inferior es las hojas de Cecropia peltata. Y es obvio que Schultes siempre tuvo lo bueno. So let's turn to English, because this is an American story. On October 31st, ojalá que todos puedan entenderme, ¿sí? Si hay alguien que no, bueno. On October 31st, 2020, WPVI Action News, an ABC affiliate in Philadelphia, led its evening report with a sensational account of a rare drug bust at Philadelphia International Airport. U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials had seized more than 12 pounds of what was described as green cocaine, along with a mysterious brown-like substance which had tested positive for nicotine. The powder had tested positive for cocaine. According to the authorities, the green hue was a way of camouflaging the drug, which through a chemical process using gasoline, ammonia, and other chemicals could be turned white, the implication being that ounce for ounce, it was just your ordinary blow tinged with another color. This seizure, reported Casey Durst, head of CBP's Baltimore field office, perfectly illustrates how Customs and Border Protection officials use keen instincts and professional scientific analysis to intercept dangerous drugs being smuggled into our communities. In Cincinnati, Port Director Richard Gillespie heralded those singularly responsible for having kept this dangerous green powder out of our neighborhoods. Of course, beneath the righteous pose was a farce worthy of Molière. The source of the nicotine reported in the bust I knew well, as you do. It was ambil, a native paste of a very high concentration of tobacco, a plant responsible for the death of 8 million human beings every year. But tobacco being legal, this substance was of no concern to the customs agents. Of course, the green powder in question was mambe. And as early as 1957, Schultes had reported its use as a mild stimulant, an essential component of the nutritional regime of the peoples of the Northwest Amazon. Daily consumption of mambe more than satisfied the recommended dietary allowance for calcium, iron, phosphorus, vitamin A, and riboflavin. Prepared from an Amazonian variety of coca with notably low concentrations of the alkaloid, less than 0.5% dry weight, mambe, as many of you know, is food as much as stimulant, as innocuous as a cup of black tea or coffee, and far better for the health. Now, the news report from WPVI noted that the green cocaine had been sent to labs in Savannah and Newark for analysis. Not reported were the actual results of the assays. Trivial amounts of cocaine equivalent to the concentration of caffeine in a coffee bean. Had anyone tried to snort the powder, they would have simply plugged their nostrils most unpleasantly with a substance the consistency of talcum powder. Mambe, as you know, is always consumed orally. To suggest that smugglers might import mambe to extract cocaine, even assuming it could be done with the high level of ash alkaline in the powder, made about as much sense as suggesting that someone would import Dom Perignon champagne to secure by chemical processing pure extracts of ethyl alcohol. Like champagne, mambe is a specialized item made by trained individuals on a small scale, a labor-intensive process that yields a highly valued and unique natural product. Drug cartels that have successfully shipped cocaine by the ton into the United States for more than 50 years are not about to waste their time with it. What in fact transpired at the airport in Philadelphia was a drug bust on par with Elliot Ness, famously of the FBI, mistaking a truckload of potatoes for vodka and seizing the entire works as a violation of the Volstead Act. Now, it's one thing to regret, after more than 50 years of a war on drugs, the fact that there are more people in more places using worse drugs in worse ways than ever before. It's quite another to acknowledge that having spent billions of dollars a year on this misguided crusade, $1 trillion altogether, the American frontline defenders still do not know the difference between a pure alkaloid extracted from a plant in 1859 and coca, a benign and highly nutritious plant revered today by millions of indigenous people and long celebrated by the cultures and civilizations of South America as the divine leaf of immortality. Now, the difference between coca leaves and cocaine, a Peruvian friend of mine once quipped, is the difference between crossing the Andes by mule and jet plane. It's a clever line, but one that misses an essential point. The effect of the leaves and the drug are not comparable. To equate coca with the raw alkaloid is in fact as misguided as suggesting that the delicious fruit of a peach is equivalent to the hydrogen cyanide found in every peach pit. And yet for nearly a century, This has been precisely the legal and political position of nations and international organizations throughout the world. Since the adoption by the United Nations of the 1961 Convention on Narcotic Drugs, no fewer than 186 countries have signed an international treaty that demonizes the traditional use of coca and calls for the complete eradication of the plant. And among the original signatories include 3 Andean nations, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, where coca, revered to this day, has been used beneficially with no evidence of toxicity or addiction for at least 8,000 years. The medicinal, nutritional, social, and spiritual value of coca has been demonstrated time and again by anthropologists, botanists, and physicians working in the Andes and Northwest Amazon. Those dominating the international agenda with their calls for the eradication of the traditional fields have done so consistently without the slightest scientific or medical justification. In fact, such policies, as we will see, only make sense when viewed through the ideological frame that led to their formulation. Efforts to deny the indigenous peoples of the Andes access to coca, as Smithsonian anthropologist Catherine Allen has written, are not analogous to outlawing, for example, beer to the Germans, tea to the British, coffee to the Turks. No, they are acts of cultural genocide. Just the latest assault in a clash of civilizations that began 500 years ago with the Spanish conquest. Now, coca is less a high than a meditation. When travelers meet in the mountains of the southern Andes or when the mamos in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta meet, they don't shake hands, they exchange leaves. In Peru, a quinto of coca, 3 perfect leaves arranged to form a cross. They then turn to face the nearest of the Apu, the mountain deities, the protective spirits that hover over every community and direct the destiny of all those born in their shadows. And so, with eyes lifted to the summits, they bring the leaves to their mouths and blow softly, a ritual invocation that sends the essence of the plant back to the earth, the community, the sacred places, and the souls of the ancestors. Now, this exchange of leaves is a social gesture, a way of acknowledging human connection. But the blowing of the puke, as it is said, is an act of spiritual reciprocity. For in giving selflessly to the earth, the individual ensures that in time, the energy of the coca will return full circle, as surely as rain falling on a field will inevitably be reborn as a cloud. In the Andes, you plant your fields after a ceremony honoring the earth, leaves sprinkled across the field. Initiations and a celebration of territory begin with a young boy dressing up as a woman and leading all able-bodied men on a run of the traditional boundaries. But it's not your ordinary run. You start off at 9,000 feet, 11,000 feet, drop down to 9,000 feet, and then you run to 16,000 feet. All the time, dressed as a woman, carrying the banners, making offerings of coca to Pachamama. It's a way of both reaffirming ownership of landscape and, of course, your obligation to the land. The future, the well-being of people, can be divined by curanderos, but to have that gift of vision, you must have survived a lightning strike. And so the entirety of coca use, the etiquette of halpai, the exchange and the salutations, the way one places the leaves in the mouth, the attitude of reverence and respect, whether it is in daily life or in ritual, in a very real sense defines what it means to be Runakuna, a child of Pachamama. And throughout the entire world, as Catherine Allen writes, one cannot function as a social being unless you partake in the ritual, and you must do it properly. Nothing offends people more than tourists who stuff their mouths with leaves like horses eating hay. But whether the leaves are taken in ritual or daily life, in the presence of a friend or a stranger, the act of chewing coca, of halpai, is to transcend self and become part of the social, moral, and spiritual nexus that in the Andes gives meaning to life. Coca alone makes possible direct communication with the divine, with some saying that the first to taste the leaves was Santissima Maria, Mother of Christ, who, according to legend, lost her holy child and chewed on the leaves to allay her grief. The point is that for the people of the Andes, to be without coca is a form of social and spiritual death, an excommunication from life itself. And if we come home to Colombia, into the homeland of the four great peoples of the Sierra Nevada, the Arahuacos, the Wiwa, the Kogi, and the Cancuano, here are people who begin to chew the leaves as they become to be men. Women harvest the field, men chew the energy of the leaves. When they meet, they exchange leaves. There is no movement in the mountains that is not mediated by some kind of gesture of respect. The initiates training for the mamos spend years in seclusion, learning of the beauty of the land as an abstraction, until finally, after 2 9-year periods of initiation, they are taken on a journey to the heart of the world. And as they see for the first time the beauty of the earth as it is, the mama who has trained them steps back and essentially says, you see, it's as I've told you all these years, the earth is that beautiful. It's yours to protect. And I've done this journey to the heart of the world twice now, and it's always moving to see it all at every point mediated through hayo, the affection and loyalty, reciprocal obligations of the people are constantly affirmed. The pilgrimages take you to the highest mountain lakes to make offerings, and then back with products from the paramos to the sea, where pagamentos take place at the mouth of the Mother Magdalena. The mamos maintain that the bounty and the beauty and the balance of the world is in their hands, that their ritual gestures maintain the cosmic balance of life. Now, the plant that has inspired such devotion is a beautiful, if delicate, shrub with small white flowers and fruits the size and color of rubies. Now, the texture and shape of the leaves varies, for there are 2 cultivated species, each with 2 varieties. Erythroxylon coca, variety coca, is a classic leaf of the Andean South, grown in the upper reaches of the tropical valleys that fall away from Cusco into the Amazon. The coca of Colombia, Erythroxylon novagranatense, variety novagranatense, is distinct. Adapted to hot, seasonally dry habitats and highly resistant to drought, it produces narrow, small leaves of a bright yellowish green hue. This, of course, was the coca of the 13th century Muisca and Quimbaya goldsmiths, the stimulant of the unknown people who carved the monoliths at San Agustin, the plant that Amerigo Vespucci encountered on the peninsula in 1499 when he recorded the first European description of coca chewing. Once grown throughout the Caribbean, north into Costa Rica, and south to the ends of Colombia, it now is restricted to the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta and in Cauca, in the homeland of the Nasa. Now, notably, the coca of Northwest Amazon of Colombia, Erythroxylon coca variety Ipadu, which is a source of mambe, is not derived from Colombian coca. It much more closely resembles the coca of the Southern Andes, leading early researchers to assume that it, in fact, that Colombian coca, that it had come down the Ucayali River and then been developed in the Northwest Amazon. Finally, there is the second variety of Nova Granatense, which is Trujillense, which is found in the valleys around the desert city of Trujillo in Peru. This was the preferred coca of the Inca, as a hint of wintergreen oil. This is the coca of Coca-Cola. Now, this is where the story gets really incredible. Significantly, DNA analysis suggests that all varieties of coca are descendants of the same common ancestor. A wild erythroxylon, Grassolepes, you can see specimens, herbarium specimens over there, that grows along the Ceja de la Montaña from Venezuela all the way, the edge of the basin, to Bolivia. Now, that taxonomy or botanical sleuthing may seem arcane, but to have three highly valued, cultivated, domesticated plants, Hayo in Colombia, Ipadu or Mambe in the Colombian Amazon, and of course coca in Peru, in the Montaña of Bolivia, derived independently from a common ancestor, separate processes of artificial selection occurring thousands of kilometers apart, is an astonishing example of parallel invention, almost unprecedented in the realm of plant domestication, made all the more wondrous by the fact that all four varieties, wherever they were found and developed, were deemed to be the essence of the sacred. All of which begs a question. What was it about coca that so powerfully drew the attention of those bringing it into domestication and cultivation? Not once, but on 3 occasions, as I said, on the mountain slopes of Colombia, in the heart of the Amazon, and the Montaña of Peru and Bolivia. Humans everywhere tasted the supple leaves of this nondescript forest shrub, and they all concluded, hey, this one's got something going for it. It was worthy of their attention. And their fidelity did not wane for 8,000 or more years as the varieties came into being and coca was both domesticated and transformed. Across lands from Costa Rica to Chile, Argentina, people everywhere, though born of unique cultures, speaking different languages, embraced the leaves with reverence and zeal, not simply as an essential source of nutrients, but as a very embodiment of the divine, a messenger of the gods. Coca touched and transformed everyone. Now, that human beings were drawn to the plant because of the physical properties of it comes as no surprise. When Harvard's Timothy Plowman, who was my big brother with whom I spent 2 years on the coca project at Harvard, mostly in the field in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, when Tim and Jim Duke of the USDA in 1975 conducted the first nutritional study of plants. That's important. Why did it take that long? We'll get to that in a minute. What they found was extraordinary. They examined 50 nutrients found in the leaves, comparing their concentration with the levels of the same nutrients in 50 common Latin American plants. And they found that coca was higher than the average in calories, protein, carbohydrates, and minerals. They discovered that in addition to these nutrients, coca had more calcium than any plant ever studied by science, making it perfect for a traditional diet that lacked a dairy product. Coca had enzymes that enhanced the body's ability to digest carbohydrate at high elevation, making it perfect for the tuber-based diet of the Andes. To the disappointment of the government of the United States, which was paying for our research, we confirmed that coca leaves, as used traditionally today by 9 million people, citizens of Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, serve as a mild stimulant that is beneficial to the health and highly nutritious. Also on the trail of coca in the 1970s was our other brother. I had 2 incredible big brothers, Tim Plowman and Andrew Weil. He was a graduate of Harvard Medical School with a profound knowledge of medicinal botany. And he was among the first modern physicians to use coca himself while conducting medical studies amongst cocaleros in both the Andes and Northwest Amazon. He found that coca facilitates well-being, eases digestion, relieves the symptoms of altitude sickness. It can be used for the treatment of rheumatism, dysentery, stomach ulcers, nausea, with having an effective and positive influence on respiration, a capacity to clean the blood of toxic metabolites, and daily use of the leaves clears the mind, elevates mood, and tones and strengthens the digestive tract. He said to me that based on his studies, there was a glaring oversight. The impossibility of securing supplies for medical research creates a catch-22 where we can't do the studies necessary to prove the efficacy of the plant because they won't allow us to bring in leaves into the laboratory. And he went on to say that, in his opinion, coca is not just a plant, but it is a gift from the heavens, a plant intended only to better the lives of all people dwelling in all places on earth. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting. Here, perhaps, is the key to the plant's sanctity. Useful and beneficial as coca may be as both a food and a medicine, such physical properties alone cannot account for its exalted place in the spiritual life in the Andes today, not to mention all the cultures and civilizations that have come before us. Coca has been universally heralded, an earthly gift bestowed upon the world by divine grace and fortune, because it does more than feed and heal our bodies. It allows us to live better lives. And for this, we can thank its most mysterious attribute, the exquisitely subtle way its effects manifest in daily and ritual use. Now, arguably, the most interesting insights about the pharmacology of coca come in the late 19th century from travelers, physicians, who were enchanted by the plant. They knew already that cocaine hydrochloride was detrimental, but they had yet to form judgments about the leaves. They had no bias. And there was a kind of ingenuous quality to their reportage where they're sort of saying, I know it's a stimulant, but it's not a stimulant, but it is a stimulant. J.T. Lloyd wrote of the native porters of Popayan in 1913. After eating a simple breakfast, they would start with their heavy packs, 100 pounds strapped to their backs. All day long they traveled at a rapid gait. They remained invariably upbeat and happy. Not only is coca not harmful, it provides nourishment to the body and treatment for disease. Now, this man, Henry Mortimer, who wrote the classic History of Coca, he acknowledged coca as a panacea, noting its virtues as a medicine, tonic, and food. But what really intrigued him was the subtlety of its mode of action. It was a stimulant, but its subjective effect on the body was unlike any other stimulant known to science. The physician W.S. Searle wrote in 1881, it's not a little remarkable that while no other substance can rival coca in its sustaining power, no other has so little apparent effect. Those expecting some internal commotion or sensation are disappointed. Now, Andy Weil captured this quality of coca beautifully in his description of his first exposure to mambe amongst the Cubeo in 1973. The effect of coca, he reported, was so could not be compared to any other natural product. His first taste of mambe occurred at night, leaving him with a good feeling. But it was only in the morning, as he huddled with the men as they exchanged a calabash full of mambe, that he came to understand what all the fuss was about. I found myself marching along in a column of cubeos, swinging my machete, humming a tune, and feeling increasingly happy. The coca seemed stronger at this hour. Oops. Do we have some tech support here for Maria? He said the coca seemed stronger at this hour of the morning. Its warm glow spread from my stomach throughout my body. I felt a subtle vibrational energy in my muscles. My step became light, and there was nothing I wanted to do more than just what I was doing. Now, the same qualities that draw our attention to coca today no doubt attracted men and women in the distant past. However they lived, they surely shared traits that mark us today. All the foibles and minor neuroses that define what it means to be human and alive. Existential malaise, the restless yearning for something new, dissatisfaction, indecision, even at times depression and despair surely go hand in hand with the human experience of consciousness. Just as death is a price we pay for the glory of being alive, so too such modest yet chronic afflictions are the cost of being sensate and aware. There's no reason to assume that the ancient peoples of the Andes were somehow free of the same mental obscurations that the Buddhists have famously identified as the bane of the human existence. This is the point. To the contrary, they would have suffered much as we suffer, and like us, would have been powerfully drawn to any plant that offered relief, as coca does. They too would have been astonished by its subtle yet pleasant effects and its practical use. What man or woman, who among you, then or now, would not want to experience a sense of enhanced energy and mental clarity, a mild suppression of hunger, a gentle feeling of creative confidence, a lightness to one's step, lasting through the day, knowing that the source of your slight elevation of mood was a benign and highly nutritious leaf that had been revered by the peoples of South America since the dawn of civilization. What could be indeed more welcoming or promising in any era than a beneficial natural product that facilitates focus and concentration, even while inducing a subtle sense of contentment and well-being? Truth be told, coca is and has always been the ideal companion for any creative endeavor, be it the weaving of cotton and wool, the carving of stone, or the writing of digital code. Coca works, and it works for everybody, which is precisely why every culture and civilization that knew the plant deemed it to be sacred, deserving of veneration. So, how on earth did such a plant, so beneficial and benign as a medicine, food, and mild stimulant, come to be classified amongst the world's most dangerous drugs, condemned by international law as the criminal equivalent of heroin, fentanyl, and crack cocaine? Well, morphine, derived from opium, was the first drug to be isolated from a plant. The second was cocaine. Celebrated as a panacea, coca was seen as being the ideal treatment for everything, from morphine addiction to that scourge of the 19th century, female masturbation. Cocaine, of course, also revolutionized surgery as the most powerful topical anesthetic that we have to this day. And for a time, as you know, and this exhibit wonderfully shows, cocaine was available in hundreds and hundreds of products. But by 1890, the use of cocaine had shown some serious concern, cocaine narcosis. And the idea of cocaine as a panacea shifted dramatically overnight. And as the medical profession came to see cocaine and morphine as equally dangerous, and because opium use had its own challenges and damages, it was just assumed that coca was to opium what cocaine was opium was to morphine, what coca was to cocaine. And thus a plant that had been used safely and benignly for thousands of years was swept up in the same sanctions that criminalized the use of opium, morphine, and cocaine. Now, that's a standard explanation, and it works to a point. But something far, far darker was at play, and I know I've gone on a long time already, and this is really where it gets important. The American government has always demonized the plant. Critically, in Peru, efforts to eradicate traditional fields began 50 years before there was a cocaine problem. The issue wasn't cocaine, but rather the cultural identity and survival of those who revered coca. The call for eradication came from public health officials in the United States, in Peru, in Colombia, in Bolivia, whose concern for those who use coca was matched in its intensity only by their ignorance of Andean life and contempt for the very people they set out to save. Now, this is a critical point. These were also the men who served on the commissions and wrote the reports that became the basis of laws and agreements that define international drug policy to this day. That these voices may still be heard coming through their writing as they conflate personal opinion with scientific fact, pseudoscience with actual science, is a scandal that lies at the heart of the coca story. In the 1920s, as physicians in Lima looked up into the Andes and saw social pathologies, poverty, illiteracy, hunger, they had to find a cause. And because issues of economic justice came too close to challenging the foundations of the bourgeois lives in Lima, they had to have a culprit, and coca became that culprit. Every possible ill, every source of embarrassment to themselves as urban Peruvians was blamed on the plant. Everything points to the conclusion, wrote Vicente Zapata Ortiz, professor of pharmacology in Lima, that the constant toxic conditions produced by coca results in acceptance of the most wretched living conditions, which are the chief cause of the cure's deficiencies, and coca, therefore, is regarded as being responsible. He went on to say that coca users were apathetic, deficient in higher mental activity, aimless, indifferent, maladjusted. Where the consumption of coca is greatest, he added, the percentage of illiteracy is high, and Quechua and Aymara remain the prevailing languages, as if that was a deficiency. Others define the coca users as feeble. These are all words from their reports. Feeble, mentally deficient, lazy, submissive, depressed. Mario Puga condemned coca as an elaborate and monstrous form of genocide being committed against people. Another doctor rallied the battle cry, "If we await with folded arms divine miracle to free our indigenous population from the deteriorating action of coca, we shall be renouncing our position as men who love civilization." Now, in the 1940s, the effort was led by this man, Gutierrez Noriega. His language was repulsive. The ideological thrust of his science was blatant. In a report published in 1947, he wrote, "The use of coca, illiteracy, and a negative attitude to the superior culture are all closely related." Now, critically, it was a result of his lobbying that the United Nations in 1947 initiated a mission to study the so-called coca problem in Peru and Bolivia. The head of the commission was an American called Henry Fonda, the head of the drug company Burroughs Wellcome, and he was also the president of the American Pharmaceutical Association. Before heading to Peru to study the problem, Fonda announced the results of the study in New York. Coca, he stated, was definitely harmful and deleterious, the cause of the racial degeneration of many population groups and the decadence which is obvious in native inhabitants. Our studies will confirm the truth of our statements, and we will submit a plan for the eradication of the plant. This he announced in New York before starting the study. He repeated those words upon arrival at the airport in Lima. That commission spent 3 months in the southern Andes of Peru and Bolivia. They interviewed alcaldes, sacerdotes, policía, militares y todo, comerciantes. They didn't speak to a single traditional user of the plant. And the final report, of course, called for the eradication of the plant within 25 years, a plant revered by people for 8,000 years. Now, closely associated with this man, Henry Fonda, was a real evil one. His name was Pablo Osvaldo Wolf, chief of the addiction-producing drug sections of the World Health Organization. He was a protege of the notorious Harry Anslinger, the father of the war on drugs, creator of reefer madness. And these were the men who literally were responsible for the documents that we live with today. He played a key role not only in Fonda's report, but in every decision related to Coca. More than any other individual, this man was responsible for the vilification and criminalization of the plant in the UN treaty system. And so given his influence, his public comments are telling, notably a 1949 lecture that he gave at the Royal Society of Medicine in London on the eve of the Commission of Inquiry being sent to Peru. This right from his writing. The Indio who does not chew coca leaves is clear-sighted intelligence, light-hearted and willing to work. The coquero, by contrast, is apathetic, lazy, insensitive to his environment. His mind is befogged. His emotional reactions are violent. He is morally and intellectually anesthetized, socially subdued, almost a slave. Moral degeneration accompanies the physical. Lying is the one outstanding character of these men, probably due to a lack of moral equilibrium. You just can't believe the language. We are convinced that coca leaf chewing is a social ill. This goes on and on. Children of coqueros are markedly deficient in intelligence. There's no doubt that the habit of coca chewing is one of the most powerful reasons for the misery of the Indian population. He went on to link coca to venereal disease, tuberculosis, alcoholism, and the remedy, of course, was the elimination of the plant. Now, critically, Wolf was not alone in his condemnation of coca. His attitude was in line with the consensus of the era, a time when urban elites ruled unchallenged over Andean countries that remained very much places of conquered and conqueror. In 1948, the Colombian government declared the mastication of leaves to be a social evil. The most prominent public official, Dr. Jorge Bejarano, Minister of Health, said that to the physical degeneration must be added the moral implication. Crime is high among coca users. It seems that their minds only obey the force of instinct and deceit. It just goes on and on. Bolivian health authorities, again with no scientific or medical justification, claim that coca caused autism, not to mention pseudo-hallucinations and mental decay. It accounted, it was written, for the social inferiority of the Indian. Meanwhile, from Quito, a country where Ecuador, where coca had been eliminated at the time of the Spanish, a noted anthropologist, Luis Leon, claimed that because of the lack of coca, there was no doubt that the cultural superiority of the Ecuadorian Indian was what it was. So Wolf stands out from his peers not because what he said was unique in his rabid combination of coca, but rather because his crude certainties and pseudoscientific exhortations were those of the very man singularly responsible for crafting the language of the UN documents and declarations that dictate international drug policy to this day. He was at Fonda's side. He was at Anslinger's side. And anyone who challenged the views was dismissed, be it anthropologists in Peru and Bolivia, Mortimer himself. And the academic writings of Wolf and his colleagues ooze conceit and contempt. In rebuttal, they offer not scientific evidence, but only personal opinion, glossed as scientific jargon. Remarkably, in the midst of their hysterical efforts to purge the nations of coca, none of these Peruvian health officials did the obvious, analyze the leaves to find out what they contained. Coca was, after all, a plant used by 9 million peoples across the Andean region. A nutritional assay, which we did in 1975, could have readily been done on the eve of Fonda's investigation in Peru. It wasn't done, and obviously, presumably, for a good reason. No one was interested in knowing what the leaves contained, unprepared as they were to accept any evidence that might challenge their narrative. Tim Plowman and Jim Duke famously would reveal in 1975 coca to be benign and chock full of vitamins, but their nutritional study came a generation too late. Not surprising, Fonda's conclusions condemned coca and recommended the phasing out of its cultivation. Wolf, the report in 1950 had one heresy: the acknowledgement by the members of the commission that coca chewing, quote, does not constitute an addiction but a habit. Wolf made sure that that was stripped from the document in both 1952 and 1954. Coca, he maintained, was the equivalent of cocaine, and it was this language that informed Article 49 of the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which called for the abolition of coca for 25 years. There was, predictably, one exception, Article 27, which legitimized the use of coca leaves for the preparation of a flavoring agent which shall not contain any alkaloids. To this day, Coca-Cola imports at least 150 tons of Trujillo coca every year to a manufacturing plant outside of Maywood, New Jersey. The essential oils and flavonoids go down to Atlanta to become the foundation of a corporation that is worth $300 billion. The cocaine extracted is sold on the legal pharmaceutical market. Coca-Cola doesn't advertise its position as the only legal importer of coca in North America, but the leaves are the reason that Coca-Cola can legitimately lay claim to be, as its advertising slogans say, the real thing. So for nearly 40 years, even as the illicit trade in cocaine convulsed Latin America and much of the world, the status of coca remained unchallenged. In 1992, the WHO launched the most comprehensive study of cocaine use ever undertaken in 19 countries. The preliminary report unexpectedly affirmed, quote, that the traditional use of leaves appears to have no negative health effects and has positive therapeutic, sacred, and social functions for indigenous Andean populations. The report went on to say that the WHO should in fact investigate the therapeutic benefits of coca. This was not what the American government wanted to hear. A man called Neil Boyer, representing the United States at the 48th meeting of the World Health Assembly in Geneva in May 1995, denounced the WHO for, quote, undermining the efforts of the international community to stamp out the illegal cultivation and production of coca. The US government, he said, was especially disturbed that the report claimed that coca leaf did not lead to noticeable damage to mental or public health, and that there were positive health effects of coca chewing. He then added that if the WHO activities related to the drugs failed to reinforce the proven policy of drug elimination, field elimination, destruction of the plant, all US support for the WHO, which was the primary funder, would be curtailed. The official WHO position remained unchanged, though the rationale became more of a stretch every year. As noted in the 1992 report of the Expert Committee of Drug Dependence, the coca leaf is appropriately scheduled under Single Convention of Narcotic Drugs 1961 simply because cocaine is extracted from the leaf. No shit, Sherlock. Meanwhile, there was a real war going on in our own country of Colombia, a war that led to the death of 400,000 people, 7 million people internally displaced, 5 million people forced to flee, a war that would not have lasted a day without the sordid profits of prohibition. And the idea that we should not liberate coca leaves simply because coca is the source of cocaine hydrochloride is the reason on that simply has fallen apart. Drug cartels that have successfully shipped cocaine by the ton into the United States for nearly 50 years could care less about the legal status of coca leaves, for it has no impact on their business. With coca as leaves as a controlled substance, the cartels have thrived. Should coca leaves be liberated, illicit cocaine production and distribution will still be subject to all the criminal sanctions that exist by international treaty today. What really is at stake are the rights of ordinary people to enjoy the benefits of the plant and the legitimacy of drug policies originally informed by the bankrupt certitudes of men whose research was deeply flawed and whose convictions, as revealed in their writing, was morally reprehensible and transparently racist. Bolivia's Vice President David Choquehuanca, speaking in Vienna at the 67th session of the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, left no doubt that the violation was a violation of the rights of indigenous people and the cultural heritage of the nation. And joined by Colombia, Bolivia demanded that coca be liberated. No one, he said, referring to the illicit trade and the ongoing war on drugs, should confuse the life-giving energy of the sacred plant with the energy of the cult of death. The time has come for the liberation of coca as we build a drug policy based instead on the cult of life. And so under pressure from both Bolivia and Colombia, in November of 2023, the WHO finally initiated a critical review to consider formally rescheduling coca out of the category along with fentanyl and heroin. There was every hope that reason would prevail, that the leaves might be made available for medical research, available for general use in the way of coffee, chocolate, and tea. As Laura Saravia, Colombia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, remarked in reference to this much anticipated review, the science will prove that the coca leaf itself is not harmful to health. There was a moment of great hope. Surely at last the truth about coca would be impossible to deny. Access to the leaves would stimulate scientific research that would objectively assess coca's medicinal and therapeutic potentials and benefits, with the ultimate goal of making available for all people a plant that promises to improve their well-being and ease the day-to-day challenges of their lives. A wide array of coca-based products would bring delight to consumers, even while supporting the more than 230,000 Colombian families who depend on coca production for their survival. Illicit trade released them to begin to restrict or perhaps even sever some of their ties to the cartel. And the liberation of the leaves could also undermine the black market trade and reduce deforestation by freeing for cultivation lands long ago cleared and abandoned. Through taxation, an international market in coca that could rival coffee because it's simply so much better as a stimulant, could generate for Colombia in particular the revenues that will allow a long-suffering nation to pay the cost of peace, having drained its treasury for 50 years to cover a war only made possible, as I said, by the profits of prohibition. Now, when I was a young student in Bogota in 1974, about to go to the Arahuacos for the first time, the parents of my friends en la Nacional me dijeron, ¿por qué quiere vivir con la gente sucia? Así fue Colombia en esa época. ¿Y ahora qué pasó? Los últimos 5 o 6 presidentes, antes que entrar a su oficina, hay que ir a la sierra para dar su respeto a los mamos que ahora están como un símbolo del patrimonio del país, ¿no? So look how Colombia has changed and grown. The problem is the WHO has not grown, and they remain mired in the same era when people said of indigenous people, why do you want to live with the dirty people? Its recent decision affirms that it remains mired in the past. Only this year, the WHO issued its report, and in utter defiance of science, elected to maintain the status quo, leaving coca leaves classified along with fentanyl and heroin as among the most dangerous of illicit drugs. Well, the effort to liberate the leaves, of course, continues. The goals remain the same: the cultural survival of the Runakuna, the Barasana, the Makuna, the Wiwa, the Kogi, Cancuano, Arahuacos, the Nasa, an end to the war on coca, a stolen legacy returned to its rightful status, all with the hope that a sacred plant, long defiled, will one day at last be heralded, as in the time of the Inca and all the ancient civilizations of the Andes, as a gift of the gods, not to mention Latin America's greatest gift to the world. And despite this recent setback, that day will surely come. Thank you so, y lo siento mucho que fue tan largo. Gracias.
Güey, muchísimas gracias por tu charla, por abrir esta conversación con tanta claridad y generosidad, en donde nos has mostrado un poco ese